Everyone loves an underdog, right? And whilst it's hard to believe now, Marvel movies were once the underdog of the cinema industry. Iron Man 1 was a risk, with Marvel on the verge of financial bankruptcy, having sold off most of their iconic characters to other studios in order to keep afloat. For example, Spider Man went to Sony, Hulk to Universal, and the X Men and the Fantastic Four to Fox. All they had left was B-listers, and that's hard to believe that at one time Iron Man, yes, Iron Man, was a B-list superhero. Over 10 years on, we saw how that B-list character garnered a popularity and legacy within cinematic history as a whole. The box office speaks for itself in the popularity of Iron Man. Adding up the figures used here from Screen Rant, every movie that contained Iron Man in, the box offices put together creates a number of $12,490,302,383. That is a lot of money. And it just goes to show how popular the Iron Man character became in the past 10 years. And that is what I want to cover today. The audience's introduction to Tony Stark and how the film excellently crafts Tony Stark to be one of the most flawed yet incredibly lovable characters in the history of cinema. There are a few key things that made this possible, but it boils down to Robert Downey Junior's performance married to excellent writing. So this video is going to break down what it is about the writing of Iron Man 1 that makes it so special. Firstly, is the way that the narrative is constructed. In its opening act, the film plays around with its storytelling by giving us a dual narrative, one focusing on Tony's experiences of being captured by the Ten Rings, and the other focusing on who Tony Stark is and how he got to the events that led to his capture. The benefit of mixing up the linearity of the story is that it condenses down all of the key information that the audience need to understand about what's happening into the first act, meaning that by the time acts 2 and 3 come round, the audience has already got a deep understanding of the character, allowing for the audience to connect with Tony Stark quicker and for longer than they would have done had the story been told in a completely linear fashion. This method also ensures that the audience don't hate the character before growing to love him. By showcasing Tony's suffering during his imprisonment at the same time as showcasing his past life of debauchery and selfishness. For example, he's selfish, which is why he runs away from his guard at the start of the film to protect himself when their convoy is attacked. But the consequences of this are that he gets impaled in the chest with shrapnel from a missile. And moreover, that missile is one of his own Stark Industries missiles, the very thing that gave him the money to live his life of debauchery, arrogance, and selfishness in the first place. So the audience is seeing firsthand the consequences of his actions, and despite the arrogance at points in the flashback clips, the audience can still feel empathy for the character because we witness the suffering that Tony is undergoing in the present moment. In addition, the non-linear storytelling adds a bit of confusion into the mix, which reflects Tony's headspace at the time in which he is captured. But then the narrative knits back up together and is linear for the rest of the film as we watch his character arc progress, starting with his escape from the cave. But by this point, the audience has already developed a bond with Tony, meaning the hard work of getting an audience to like your character has already been done. A key element in ensuring that the audience grow to love Tony is how he evolves during the time of his capture, and this is achieved through Yinsen, a fellow scientist taken hostage by the Ten Rings, who they want to help Tony build their very own Jericho missile for them. The bond that develops between Yinsen and Tony acts as proof that Tony Stark has a heart, as showcased in moments like when Tony stops the Ten Rings from burning Yinsen when the Ten Rings demand that they work faster. I would argue that Yinsen saves Tony. He is almost the first hero of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because not only does he save Tony physically by building an electromagnet to stop the remaining pieces of shrapnel reaching Tony Stark's heart, but I also feel that Yinsen makes Tony question much about Tony's former lifestyle. It's some of the differences between them that Tony learns from. One I love in particular is when Yinsen asks if Tony has a family, to which Tony says no, and Yinsen then follows this up with the man who has everything, but also nothing. It showcases that Tony's life, up until this date, had been meaningless and without purpose. And Yinsen showcases this through showing Tony what it is that he lacks. In the climax of Act 1, once Tony Stark has built his Mark 1 Iron Man armor, Tony doesn't just run away to save himself this time, like he did when the Ten Rings attacked his military convoy at the start of the film. This time, he wants to save Yinsen along with himself. But what Tony doesn't know is the tragedy that Yinsen has withheld from him. In one of their earlier conversations, Yinsen reveals to Tony that he has a family, but he withholds the fact that they've all been killed. Yinsen's last act is to buy Tony some more time to suit up before the Ten Rings can stop them both. And Yinsen is comfortable with doing this because what Yinsen wants is to be at peace again and to be with his family again in the afterlife. This is his dream and this is what he wants to achieve. Through Tony's daring and genius plan to rescue them both, he unknowingly gives Yinsen the opportunity to sacrifice himself. It's why some of Yinsen's last words are, "This was always the plan, Stark. I want this." But his final words are the most important of all. His final words are to don't waste it. Don't waste your life. And in that moment, Tony realizes that he has a higher purpose than the debauchery and selfishness that he dedicated his life to up until that point. And through Yinsen's sacrifice, Tony has now experienced true heroism from someone for the first time. And to me, it's in that moment that the Iron Man character is truly born. Tony's shift in personality begins from the moment he returns home, immediately shutting down the weapons division of Stark Industries. His experiences while under the capture of the Ten Rings showed him the consequences of his actions. His lifestyle of the billionaire playboy philanthropist detached him from the cost that it caused others for him to have that lifestyle. His capture acts as a cold awakening to Tony about the reality of what he's done. And by having Stark weapons in the Ten Rings camp and seeing them used in action and even feeling them trying to inch their way towards his heart, acts as literal representations of the detachment of his former lifestyle and the human cost of that lifestyle starting to link up. For the first time in his life, Tony Stark has gained some perspective. The movie ultimately is a story about taking accountability for your actions. This is how you find meaning and purpose in life. That's the message that the film conveys. Before Tony was without purpose, he was using his years simply to indulge in hedonism despite his great potential. And through the events of this movie, Tony Stark is forged into a hero. One of the things I adore about characters like Iron Man or Batman is that they aren't born heroes, they must become them. And I really like that message because it's inspiring, because it tells us that whoever we were, whoever we are now, if we want to become a better person and make a difference to the world, we can do. And personally, that's a far more heroic and inspiring message than heroes who are born perfect and born heroic. And it's this quality, the quality of change that Tony Stark has, which I think is a major factor in the character's popularity. Audiences seem to really enjoy the idea of a redemption story, which is ultimately what the first Iron Man movie is, more so perhaps than some of the other cinematic outings that the character has had. The film also delivers this while keeping nuance in the writing. Whilst Tony goes on a character arc of great change, enough of the character is kept the same, it's still identifiable as Tony Stark. His quick-witted quips and his need to tell the world he's Iron Man at the end showcase this. But gone is the selfish man who runs away from everyone else to protect himself. So through nuance, the character is able to progress and better himself. But enough of his personality is retained that he is still recognisably Tony to the very final frame of the movie. Tony's humanity is also explored through the trials and tribulations of perfecting the Iron Man suit during Act 2 of the film. These sequences add a flavour of relatability to the character. He doesn't make one Iron Man suit and it be perfect from the get-go. He has to learn and struggle, make mistakes and fail. These not only act as some great opportunities for comedy, but also ground him into feeling more like a real human being, and tie back to this idea mentioned about heroes being forged rather than born. The movie works so well as a standalone as well, which is something I feel the MCU has lost sight of in many of the projects of late. It feels like every film these days is designed to set up the next one, whereas the only hints to a further story come in one post-credit scene at the end of this movie. The rest is pretty self-contained. The movie works as a standalone because, in a way, Tony's arc is complete. The film has a clear beginning, middle, and end in which the protagonist progresses forward and changes as a result of the events of the film. This is something that I find slightly less clear or apparent in some of Iron Man's other outings, such as Iron Man 2, but this is then rectified in the first Avengers. In some ways, the Iron Man storyline can be seen to repeat itself as the films go on. It normally seems to work in a cycle of guilt for his actions and him constantly trying to prove that he has what it takes to sacrifice himself. But then progressing forward to Avengers Endgame, it twists this geniusly because it shifts so that Tony finally has something to lose. He has a family of his own, and by sacrificing himself in Endgame, he loses what he loves. It's the opposite of Yinsen's sacrifice, who dies to be with his family again, whereas Tony has to die to be apart from them, to save everyone. So when he finally does get around to actually sacrificing himself in Avengers Endgame, it feels so final and tragic because Tony did what Yinsen told him to do, and that was to don't waste it. Don't waste your life. I almost wish they kept the deleted scene of Tony in the Soul Realm after using the gauntlet in Avengers Endgame, but instead of having Morgan Stark show up, have Yinchen show up and be proud of Tony. It would have been a nice nod to where it all began and would have been the final piece that tied everything together. But never mind, because ultimately Endgame's conclusion to Tony's arc was exactly as it should have been, so I'm not going to complain. It's also worth noting that the visuals in the film and the set pieces are also excellent, with, in my opinion, some of the best Iron Man suit designs and CGI. I much prefer the ones that are pre-nanotech because they feel more real and believable, and in my opinion, also look cooler. And lastly, it goes without saying in any Iron Man video that Robert Downey Junior is Tony Stark. He exudes the charisma needed for that character to work, and without him, I don't know whether or not the character would have ever been as beloved as he has been. So thank you, Robert. There are millions of fans out there who are grateful for your excellent performance over the years and movies you've been in. So, my take on Iron Man 1 is that it isn't just any old Marvel movie. It's the Marvel movie that began it all. It's not revolutionary in the type of story that it tells, but it really doesn't need to be, because sometimes simplicity can create the most powerful stories of all. And Iron Man is an instant classic because it works outside of a larger cinematic universe in order to make sense. It is arguably a very important movie in the history of cinema because it's a key film in what led to the spiraling success of the superhero genre. Iron Man 1 played a major role in kickstarting a new wave of popularity for the superhero genre, and in the process giving birth to the largest and most popular cinematic franchise of all time. If you made it this far, thank you so much for your time and for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give a like and hit subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Have a fantastic day and all the best. Thanks.